died in a rubbish chute. Don't watch if you are claustrophobic. By all accounts, Liam Manley's life set him on a trajectory where history would not have remembered him. However, what happened on May 12, 2013, at City Garden Apartments on Main Street in Cork City would make him a household name, and his story is enough to make many people cringe, especially if you are claustrophobic. Who is Liam Manley? Not much is known about Liam Manley, aside from the fact that he was 59 years old at the time of his death. According to all reports, he had also fallen on some tough times. Many reports suggest that he had worked a fair bit in his life, but due to some bad decisions, he had fallen on some tough times which might have ultimately led to his death. Patrick McGrath, attorney on the case, had the following to say. The deceased was a man who had worked a fair bit in his life, but he had fallen on hard times. He developed a drinking problem. At the time of his death, he was effectively an alcoholic. This would somewhat confirm that the life of Mr. Manley had taken a turn for the worse, and that he had experienced some tough times, eventually ending up homeless as well. Mr. Manley would naturally try to help out at the local shelter, but at the end of the day, he became more dependent on them than he could help. Other than this brief snippet of information, Mr. Manley lived a life outside of the public eye and tried to survive as much as he possibly could while drinking away some of the heartbreak and misery. But what happened next would be one of the most brutal cases Cork City has ever had to deal with. The death of Liam Manley. On May 12, 2013, Liam Manley and a man by the name of David O'Loughlin are said to have met after a heavy night of drinking at around 4 a.m. At around 6 a.m., the pair were joined by an acquaintance of Mr. O'Loughlin, a man by the name of David O'Mahony, who reports say had also been drinking. It is believed that Mr. Manley had stayed out past curfew from the local shelter where he stayed, and Mr. O'Loughlin stopped to talk to him. He bought him a burger and chips from a nearby McDonald's. The two would retreat to the apartment of David O'Loughlin, where they continued drinking until David O'Mahony arrived. It is believed that he made an entirely baseless allegation suggesting that Mr. Manley was a kiddie fiddler. This was the boiling point which triggered Mr. O'Loughlin due to his own life experiences. By looking at the case files, it is clear that some verbal abuse between the victim and the perpetrator had been taking place. Whatever caused the dispute is still something everyone is wondering about, but Mr. McGrath, the special counsel on the case, would later say in court that Mr. O'Mahony actually tried to stop this situation, asking the perpetrator to stop, but he was directly told to shut up and sit down. According to the witness, the verbal abuse quickly spiraled out of control and turned into physical assault, and the last thing the witness recalled was Mr. Manley being dragged out of the apartment and a steel door closing out the apartment. Later, the state would allege that this was the door leading to the rubbish chute, but Mr. Manley was still alive during this period of time. In fact, Liam Manley was only 5'4" in size compared to David O'Loughlin, who was standing well over 6 feet tall. No one witnessed the actual act of him being dumped in the chute, but Mr. O'Mahony recalled in court that the perpetrator returned to him and said the man was down the drain, directly referring to him dumping the victim down the garbage chute. Pathological evidence would later reveal that mechanical asphyxiation would be the main cause of death. And whilst many argued that due to the size of the chute, Mr. Manley should have fallen directly through and into the rubbish bin, it is believed that some garbage bags were already lodged in the chute. This can be attributed to the fact that the chute has a very slight bend. According to the report, Mr. Manley, who was still conscious before being pushed down the chute, found himself lodged inside the rubbish chute, where he had become wedged, and this would ultimately lead to his asphyxiation inside the chute. Later, Michael Ford, a maintenance worker at the apartment, was alerted to the blockage in the chute, which by now had led to piling up of garbage. Got some rods, which he had used to try and clear the blockage, something that is common in many apartment buildings that use a garbage chute as a way of disposing of their trash. In a statement heard by the court, Mr. Ford noticed a copious amount of red liquid, which he thought at first was some kind of source emerging from the rubbish. It dawned on him relatively quickly that it was blood. It was then that law enforcement was alerted to the scene, and what they found was the horrific body of Mr. Manley, and an investigation began. O'Loughlin would finally be arrested and face trial, but the trial was one of the most fascinating parts of this story. The trial and sentencing. Whilst the trial had taken place immediately, and Mr. O'Loughlin was convicted of murder, he initially received a retrial due to the fact that one of the jurors went to the apartment block and threw a stone down the chute. It is also worth mentioning that David O'Loughlin had faced 49 previous convictions dating back to 2004, with many of these attributed to his traumatic family life and the foster care he had to endure during early childhood. However, during the retrial, which took place 2 years later in 2015, David O'Loughlin was handed down a massive life sentence for the murder of Liam Manley. During his time in prison, Mr. O'Loughlin entered numerous rehabilitation programs and showed actual remorse for the death of Liam Manley. He also retained his innocence, also believing that it was an accident, and even taking the option of manslaughter initially presented to him. His life sentence would finally be quashed in 2021 by a court, and he would be tried for manslaughter, which he would be found guilty of. Mr. O'Loughlin would ultimately be convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison, of which he had already served the largest majority, and this was backdated, meaning that he was to be released in 2022. In the aftermath of this situation, the public definitely found themselves between a rock and a hard place. Many would sympathize with Mr. O'Loughlin, and with his history of personal abuse as a child coming to the forefront, it was undeniable that this had an effect on his actions of the evening. Unfortunately, the accused was severely intoxicated, and studies have shown an undeniable correlation between alcohol consumption and how actions are often misrepresented or how emotions affect individuals. The accused also released numerous statements of remorse in which he would profusely apologize for what had happened. "I wish to sincerely apologize for the death I caused Liam Manley. No human being should have to go through what Liam went through." He continued by saying that the killing haunts him, and he has come to learn that Mr. Manley was a kind and caring man. The witness impact statements from the family of the victim would also confirm this. And whilst many believed Mr. Manley was simply alone and isolated, struggling to survive, he still had people who cared for him, and his family still doesn't accept the apology from the accused. This video tells an interesting tale of how quickly things can spiral out of control, and how easy it is for a simple evening of alcohol to lead to life-changing repercussions. One had lost his life, whilst the other had lost his life in jail, and now has to re-establish his life. But we would thank you for watching this video, and by liking and subscribing, you are definitely helping to keep doing the research and creating these videos you enjoy. Until next time.